I want you to just, for a second, close your eyes seriously. I want you to imagine you're standing in a warehouse.
Mm.
It's dark, okay? The only light you can see is from, I don't know, a few flickering torches on these damp stone walls.
And you can hear dripping somewhere, that constant, slow drip.
But the first thing that really hits you, and this is something the sources are so incredibly specific about, it's not what you see.
No, it's the smell. It's completely overwhelming.
What is it?
It's this heavy, cloying mixture of stale olive oil, unwashed bodies, ancient stone, and then underneath all of that, there's this sharp, almost metallic tang of fear.
So just to be clear, we are not in a temple right now. We are not in the Roman Senate listening to some grand speech.
No, not at all. We're not looking at a beautiful marble statue. We are, for all intents and purposes, in the back room of the ancient world.
You're in Corinth.
Yeah.
The year is 146 BCE. And standing in this room, barefoot on that cold, wet stone, is a woman. Her name is Cleomash.
And to really get your head around the gravity of this moment, you have to rewind just 3 weeks. You have to understand who Cleomac was.
Right. Who was she before this warehouse?
She was the pinnacle of Greek society, 31 years old. She was the wife of a ruling magistrate.
So she had power.
She had immense power. She managed a household of 40 servants. She was literate. She could quote Homer by heart. She understood complex trade negotiations. She was, in every meaningful sense, royalty in her city.
She gave the orders?
She was the one who gave all the orders. And today she is naked. She's standing in a line with 11 other women. She's terrified, and she's completely silent.
And the sources say she hasn't seen the sun in 14 hours. Hasn't eaten in nearly 20.
And the person standing across from her, he isn't a politician or a diplomat or even really a soldier anymore. It's a man named Gaius Varius Flaccus.
And Flaccus is, I guess, the antagonist of our deep dive today, though I'm guessing he wouldn't see himself that way at all.
Not for a second. To him, he's just a professional. Flaccus isn't a conqueror. He's a dealer. He has 27 years of experience in the trade.
So when he looks at Cleomac,
he doesn't see a tragedy. He sees an investment. He sees potential profit and potential loss.
That is the chilling distinction we are unpacking today. Usually when we talk about Rome, we get the highlight reel, the philosophy, the aqueducts, the military brilliance.
The greatest hits.
But today, we're going into the machine. We're going to look past all that glory and uncover the industrial, systematic processing of human beings, specifically high-value noble women, into what the Romans legally called merchandise.
It's a side of history that gets sanitized, I think, because it's just so uncomfortable. We hear the word slavery and we think of it in this abstract way, or we picture manual labor in a field.
Right, something distant.
Very distant. But what we're going to do in this deep dive is track the specific 3-day protocol that was used to break a human being's spirit in order to maximize profit.
Right.
We are tracking Cleomac from the literal moment of capture to the auction block.
So this isn't just a war is bad story.
Yeah.
This is about a specific business model. It's about how you take a person, a full person, and turn them into a product.
Precisely. And the only reason we can do this, the reason we can get this granular, is because of the sources. And they are brutally, brutally honest about it.
They didn't hide it.
They wrote about it. We're pulling from Roman legal texts, things like warranties and disclosures that dealers were legally required to sign. We're looking at literary descriptions from writers like Ovid and Martial, who wrote about buying slaves as casually as we might, write a car review today.
Wow. And you mentioned archaeology.
And we're looking at archaeological evidence from the great slave markets, places like Delos, that show us the physical layout of these processing centers.
Okay, so the mission today is to understand the mechanics of dehumanization. How do you take a Cleomac, proud, educated, powerful, and in just 3 days, turn her into a compliant commodity?
Well, it starts long before she even gets to that warehouse. It starts with the economics of conquest.
Okay, let's set that scene then. Corinth has fallen. The walls are breached. The Roman legions are pouring into the city. Now, I've always pictured this as just pure, unadulterated chaos. Fire, looting, indiscriminate violence.
And it is. There is always chaos in that initial breach, certainly. You can't avoid that. But the Roman military machine was incredibly disciplined when it came to one thing: asset seizure.
And human beings were the primary asset.
The number one asset. When a city falls, the army, it sort of switches gears. The men, military-age males, they are a liability. They're dangerous.
So what happens to them?
Most are killed on the spot. If they're taken, they're immediately funneled into the absolute worst heavy labor. The mines, the quarries, they're disposable fuel for the empire.
So they aren't the high-value target for a dealer like Flaccus.
Not at all. They're bulk goods. Then you have the children who are separated out. They're a different kind of investment, a long-term one. But then you have the women.
Specifically, the noblewomen.
And this is where the sorting process begins, right there in the streets.
Okay, but hold on. If I'm a Roman soldier, I've been marching for weeks, maybe months. I'm full of adrenaline, the city's burning around me. Do I really have the presence of mind to stop and evaluate a woman's market value? Why wouldn't I just grab the gold statues and run?
That's the intuitive assumption, isn't it? That it's just a smash and grab. But the Roman command structure was smarter than that. They understood incentives.
Money.
Exactly. They knew that if soldiers just rampaged, they would destroy millions and millions of denarii worth of what was now considered state property. So they created a bounty system.
Money talks.
Louder than almost anything else. If a soldier kills a high-value captive like Cleomach, he might steal the rings off her fingers. Okay, that's maybe a few months' pay.
Which is pretty good.
It is. But if he secures her, if he brings her to the designated holding area unharmed, he gets a bounty that could set him up for 5 years. Suddenly, he's not looking at a woman, he's looking at a winning lottery ticket.
So he has a direct financial incentive to protect the merchandise.
A huge one.
Okay, so how does he spot her?
Yeah.
In all the smoke and screaming and chaos, how does he know that Cleomach is the jackpot?
He's trained to look for indicators. It's almost like a field triage system. First, the clothes. Is she wearing purple-dyed wool?
Kyrian purple, the famous stuff.
Exactly. That dye was made from thousands of crushed murex snails, imported from Phoenicia. It was astronomically expensive. If she's wearing that, she has money. Or her family does.
Jewelry.
Jewelry, yes.
Yeah.
But the most reliable indicator, the one the soldiers were trained to check immediately, it was the hands.
Her hands? Really?
They would grab a woman's hands and just flip them over. They were looking for one thing: calluses. If the hands were rough, if they were worn, she was a worker. A field hand, a weaver, a cook. Low value, bulk goods.
But if the hands were soft?
If the hands were soft, if the skin was unblemished, that meant she had never performed a day of manual labor in her life.
It meant she was aristocracy.
It meant she was a luxury good. They also listened to the voice. A certain speech pattern, a certain way of holding oneself. The Romans called it dignitas. Even in absolute terror, a woman like Cleomach carries herself differently than a peasant.
So let's put it all together. Cleomach is in her home. The door is kicked in. A soldier grabs her. He checks her hands. He sees the purple wool. And in that instant, she's no longer a casualty of war.
She's inventory. She's seized immediately.
And in her specific case, this historical composite we're building, she was taken with her family, right?
She was, with her 3 children and about 40 of her own servants. But here's the first real trauma of the supply chain: the categorization.
The sorting.
The soldier brings them all to a central collection point. The 40 servants, they go straight to the bulk dealer. They'll probably end up on farms or in labor gangs. The children, they go to the youth dealer, a completely different specialist. And Cleomach is separated from all of them. She is identified as high value and sold to Flaccus, our high-end specialist.
Does she even get to say goodbye to her kids?
No, there's no time for that. It happens in minutes. She is literally pulled one way, her children are pulled another, and the statistical likelihood is that she never, ever sees them again.
My God. That brings us to the transport. You mentioned in the intro that she hadn't seen the sun in 14 hours. Why is that?
Because Flaccus uses covered carts. Always.
I mean, my first thought is that's to prevent escape. If you don't know where you are, you can't run.
That's definitely part of it. Disorientation is a key tool of control, always has been. But you have to think about it from his perspective as a logistics manager.
Okay.
You have just acquired a very expensive, very delicate piece of merchandise. You do not want that merchandise damaged by the harsh Greek sun. You don't want it rained on.
So it's about protecting the asset.
Exactly. And, professionally speaking, you don't want your competitors seeing what kind of stock you've just acquired before you're ready to bring it to market.
It's trade secrets. He's hiding his inventory from his rivals.
He is, but the psychological side effect of that business decision is immense. It's sensory deprivation.
Or darkness.
Pitch blackness. She's moving. The cart is bouncing over the cobblestones, but she has no idea if she's going 5 miles or 50. She's hungry. She's likely dehydrated. By the time that cart finally stops and the doors open, her world has shrunk to nothing. She has zero situational awareness.
She's completely dependent on the people opening that door.
100%, which is exactly the state he wants her in when she arrives.
So she arrives at Flaccus's facility.
Mm-hmm.
And you made a point to say this isn't a prison. You called it a dealer's facility. What's the difference?
A prison is just for holding. A dealer's facility is a workshop. The archaeological evidence from Delos, which was the absolute center of the slave trade in the Mediterranean, shows us these buildings.
And what do they look like?
They had holding cells, yes, small ones. But they also had bathing wings, dedicated examination rooms, and even raised platforms for display and training. It's not a jail, it's a factory floor designed for processing human beings.
Okay, let's talk about that processing. The assessment. This is where the dehumanization shifts from the, hot chaos of war to the coldness of bureaucracy.
That's a perfect way to put it. The first step is the physical examination. And we have to be really clear about what this entails to understand the sheer violation of it.
So what happens?
Cleomac is brought into one of these examination rooms. There are male assistants, prison assistants to the dealer, Flaccus, and she is stripped.
And the sources say these men show professional indifference, which in a way feels so much worse than if they were being aggressive or leering.
Oh, it's far worse. It's the indifference of a butcher inspecting a side of beef. If they were jeering, it would be an assault, yes, but it would be an emotional interaction. This is an inventory check.
And they're measuring her.
I mean, literally measuring her. They take out calipers, they measure her height, they put her on a scale and measure her weight. They even measure the ratio of her limbs to her torso.
Wait. The limb to torso ratio. Why on earth would they need that? That sounds completely absurd.
It sounds absurd to us, but Roman buyers, especially the wealthy ones, had very specific aesthetic standards for what they considered beauty or proportion in a high-status slave. They wanted data points.
It's like checking the specs on a new phone before you buy it.
That's exactly what it is. It's collecting the product data, but then it gets medical.
This is the part of the notes.
Yeah.
This part made my skin crawl.
They check the teeth. Not just for health, but they're using wear and tear to verify her age. They check the thickness of her hair. They scan every inch of her skin for any blemishes, scars, birthmarks. And then they perform invasive internal health checks.
And this brings us to one of the most surprising and, frankly, disturbing parts of this whole thing. You found a legal reason for this. This wasn't just cruelty for the sake of cruelty.
No. In a twisted way, it was consumer protection.
Boy.
We have to look at the Edict of the Curule Aediles. These were the magistrates in Rome responsible for market regulation. The great Roman jurist Ulpian wrote extensively on this. Under Roman law, a slave dealer like Flaccus was strictly liable if they sold merchandise with hidden defects.
Hidden defects. We're talking about people here.
We are talking about people,
Yeah.
But in the eyes of the law, we are talking about products. A hidden defect could be anything: epilepsy, a chronic fever, a tendency to run away that was considered a psychological defect, a fugitive instinct.
So running away was like a faulty engine.
Precisely. It could even be a history of suicide attempts. All of these things had to be disclosed on the titulus, the sign around their neck.
So if a buyer paid top dollar for Cleomac and 3 weeks later she fell ill or tried to take her own life, the dealer could actually be sued.
Absolutely. The buyer could demand a full refund or, in some cases, a replacement. So this invasive, humiliating medical exam where they are probing every part of her body. It's due diligence.
He's protecting his bottom line.
Flaccus is just protecting his business from a future lawsuit.
That is. It's chilling. It turns the horror of it into paperwork.
And that is the absolute banality of this evil. It's a transaction. To Flaccus, he is simply being a responsible business owner.
So they've measured her, they've checked her teeth, they've done this internal exam.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, they are watching her, right? It's not just physical.
No, this is happening simultaneously. This is the psychological assessment. While they are poking and prodding her, they are giving her simple commands.
Like what?
Lift your arm, turn around, open your mouth. And all the while, they are watching her face. They are watching the micro expressions.
And what are they looking for? What's the data point there?
They're looking for the balance between resistance and resignation. Does she hesitate for a split second before lifting her arm? Does she glare at the assistant? Does she clench her jaw? Or does she just do it? Eyes cast down, no reaction at all.
And in Cleomach's case, the notes say she was classified as resistant but controlled. What does that mean for her future?
It means she's dangerous, but also very valuable. A noble woman with pride, with fire. That's an attractive trait to certain buyers. It implies high breeding,
But it's also a risk.
a huge risk.
Yeah.
It means she is high risk for rebellion or suicide. So the official verdict from Flaccus after this assessment is likely to require intensive preparation.
And that verdict, that little note in his ledger, dictates everything that's about to happen to her for the next 3 days.
Everything.
Intensive preparation. That has to be one of the darkest euphemisms I've ever heard. Let's get into that. Part 3, the manufacturing process. Because that's really what this is. They're manufacturing a slave out of a free woman.
And the first step in that manufacturing process is what the dealers called the cleansing.
Which, of course, implies that she was dirty to begin with.
Dirty with the residue of her former life. That's the idea. And this isn't just a bath with some soap and water. They use abrasive, pumice stones, strigils, those curved metal scraping tools you see in museums. They scrub the skin raw. The symbolic goal is to physically erase the history that's written on her body. The dirt of the journey, yes, but also the scent of her home, the specific oils she used as a free woman. They are literally scrubbing away the Greek aristocrat to leave a blank slate.
A blank canvas for them to paint on.
Exactly. And then comes the hair removal. I feel like we need to pause on this because the method they described in the sources is, well, it's just torture.
It's not shaving, is it?
No. The Roman aesthetic for high-end domestic slaves demanded totally smooth bodies, but they didn't just shave them. They used these resinous substances. You can think of it like a primitive, very, very sticky wax and pitch.
Oh my God.
They'd apply it to her legs, her arms, everywhere, and then they would pull the hair out by the root.
That's not grooming. That is deliberately inflicting pain.
It's pain with a purpose.
Yeah.
Imagine you are Cleomash standing there having this done to you. It hurts intensely, but you are not allowed to scream. You are not allowed to pull away.
It's a lesson.
It serves as a very sharp, very immediate lesson in ownership. I can do this to you. I can inflict this level of pain on you simply to meet my aesthetic standard, and you have to stand there and take it. It asserts total, absolute physical control.
It breaks the boundary of your own body. You don't even own your skin anymore.
That's it. You don't own your skin. And once that canvas has been stripped bare, they begin what they call the cosmetic reconstruction.
What does that involve?
They oil the skin so it will shine under the auction torches. They style her hair, but not in the Greek style she's worn her entire life. They style it in a Roman fashion.
It's identity theft. They're
Yeah.
literally dressing her up as someone else, as one of them.
They are making a Greek noblewoman look like a Roman domestic slave. They are packaging the product for the target demographic.
And then the rehearsal. This was something I hadn't really thought about before reading the sources. They actually trained them for the auction block.
Oh, absolutely. It's a performance. You don't just walk a 12,000 denarii investment up there and hope for the best. The dealer needs a flawless performance to get top price.
And we know this from writers like Marshall.
Yes, he gives us so many clues about this. He describes dealers making the merchandise perform specific, choreographed movements.
Like what kind of movements?
Simple commands: stand up, sit down, walk to the left, turn around, show your teeth, lift your tunic.
There were standard poses that were designed to highlight muscle tone or gracefulness.
It's like training an animal for a show.
It's exactly that.
And if you don't do it, if Cleomach, in that moment, full of pride, refuses to twirl on command,
the consequences are immediate. Physical restraint or deprivation of food for the next meal or the sting of a whip. The lesson during this training phase is brutally simple. Compliance prevents pain. Non-compliance invites it.
it's basic behavioral conditioning.
Applied to a human being who, just days before, was quoting Homer.
So they've completely changed how she looks. They've taught her how to move on command. But inside, Cleomach is still in there. She's still a mother, a wife, a highly intelligent person. How do they get to her mind? How do they break the person inside the body? This is the dark heart of the process. Part 4, the breaking point. Or what we're calling the psychological processing.
And this is where we break down the 5 techniques. What's so scary about this list is how modern it sounds. I feel like if you picked up a manual on interrogation or cult deprogramming today, you'd see these exact same things.
Because human psychology hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The Romans, through trial and error, they figured out the buttons you have to push to dismantle a personality.
Okay, let's unpack them. Technique number 1, isolation.
Right. Cleomach arrived with 11 other women. Maybe she even knew some of them. Maybe they were neighbors from her district in Corinth. The very first thing Flaccus does is separate them.
Why? I mean, from a logistics point of view, wouldn't it be easier to just keep them all in one big room?
Easier for logistics, yes, but incredibly dangerous for control. If she has peers, she has a support network. She has someone to whisper to in the dark, someone to validate her reality.
Someone to say, this is insane, right?
Yeah. And have someone else whisper back, yes, this is insane. If you take that away, she is completely and utterly dependent on her captors for every scrap of human interaction.
She's alone in a cell. The only person who ever speaks to her is the person holding the keys.
Exactly. And eventually, she begins to crave that interaction, even if it's from her abuser, which leads directly into technique number 2, identity denial.
They stop using her name.
The word Cleomac is gone. It's banned. She is now number 17, or the Greek, or most commonly just girl.
Just imagine that for a second. Imagine someone looking you right in the eye, someone you are completely dependent on for food and water, and refusing to acknowledge your name, the very sound of who you are.
It's a fundamental form of gaslighting. It's an active denial of her entire history. They are telling her, with every interaction, that person you think you are, the aristocrat, the mother, the wife, she doesn't exist anymore. She's gone. You are only what we say you are.
Technique number 3, status demonstration. This is all about humiliation, isn't it?
It's about reality testing. It's one thing to be told your status is gone. It's another to be forced to physically perform it. Remember, this is a woman who had 40 servants. She likely hadn't washed a dish or swept a floor in 20 years.
So what does Flaccus make her do?
He makes her clean her own cell. He makes her eat her meager rations off the floor like a dog.
So it forces her to physically act out her new, debased reality.
Every single time she scrubs that stone floor, her own body is sending a message to her brain. This is who you are now. You are a slave. This is what you do now. It creates a cognitive dissonance that eventually resolves into acceptance of the new role just to reduce that constant mental friction.
And the 4th technique, uncertainty.
To me, this is the most insidious one, the most cruel. She asks the question, where are my children?
And the answer.
Silence. No answer. She asks, where am I going? No answer. What will happen to me next? No answer.
It's psychological torture. It creates a state of constant, unbearable anxiety.
It completely exhausts the brain. If you don't know what's coming, you can never relax, you can never prepare for it. You live in a state of high alert stress cortisol, just flooding your system, that burns you out physically and mentally. You become pliable because you are simply too tired to fight the unknown anymore.
And that brings us to the final technique, number 5. Witness to consequences.
She hears the others.
The ones who didn't comply, the ones who fought back.
Yes. The walls of that warehouse are thick, but they aren't soundproof. She hears the screams from other cells. She hears the sounds of beatings. It's a psychological concept we now call vicarious traumatization.
She doesn't have to be beaten herself to learn the lesson.
Not at all. She just has to know that it's happening to someone else, someone just like her, in the next room. That's enough to enforce compliance.
So you take all of this, the isolation, the identity denial, the status breakdown, the uncertainty, the constant fear, and what's the result? You call it traumatic adaptation.
It's a really crucial term. We often use words like breaking or giving up, but that's not quite right. It implies a kind of weakness. Traumatic adaptation is an active, even intelligent survival mechanism.
How so?
The brain, her brain, realizes that the old self, the proud, defiant, commanding Cleomac, will get killed in this environment. So in order to survive, the brain suppresses that self. It puts it away in a box, and it constructs a new persona.
A persona that complies. A persona that can survive this.
A persona that the dealer Flaccus would look at and call market ready.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that she likes it. It's not that she's accepted it in her soul. It's that she has adapted to the absolute crushing powerlessness of her situation. She has learned that the only way to stop the pain is to disappear into the role they've created for her.
That is just, it's heartbreaking. It's survival, but at the cost of your entire self.
It is the ultimate tragedy of the system. It was designed to produce that outcome.
Now, we've been focusing on Cleomash as our kind of composite case, but the source material highlights that this system wasn't one size fits all. It had variables. Not every woman reacted the same way, and the dealers didn't always use the exact same leverage.
Exactly. The human element always introduces chaos and variation. We have 4 other case studies from the sources that really show the range of this horror.
Okay, let's look at the first one. Bernice of Carthage. This was 146 BCE as well, the same year as Corinth, but a different city being destroyed.
A very different story. Bernice was the daughter of a Carthaginian senator, but her story isn't just about her status. It's about the leverage of family.
What happened?
Bernice was captured with her 2 daughters, aged 6 and 4. Now remember the supply chain we talked about? Children go to the youth dealer.
So they were separated from her.
Immediately. But here is the twisted psychological hook the dealer used on her. He didn't just take them away. He implied, he never promised it in writing, of course, but he heavily implied that compliance offered the hope of information.
So he's saying, be a good slave, and maybe I'll tell you about your kids.
If you cooperate, if you don't cause any trouble, maybe we can find out where they went. Maybe we can get a message to them for you. It's monstrous. It's weaponizing a mother's love.
And was it effective?
Incredibly effective. The record says Bernice served for 11 years as a perfect slave. She was flawless. She worked hard. She never complained. She never tried to run.
Because she was holding on to that one tiny sliver of hope? She thought her good behavior was earning her daughters back.
She asked about her daughters exactly once. It was about a year into her service. She was shut down, told to focus on her duties and not to ask again.
And she never did.
She never asked again. She died of a fever 11 years later without ever knowing where they went or if they were even still alive.
And you mentioned the philosopher. Seneca wrote about this.
He did. Seneca notes this dynamic. He basically says that family separation was a feature, not a bug, of the system. A slave with no connections is easier to control, sure, but a slave with connections that you, the master, can dangle just out of reach, that is total control.
Wow. Okay, the next case is Theodora of Macedon. This one is fascinating because it's not about family, it's about faith.
Right. She was a priestess of Artemis, captured in 167 BCE. For her, the core of her identity wasn't just noblewoman, it was servant of the gods. Her entire worldview, her sense of self, was structured around her purity and her divine service.
So for the dealer, you can't just break the noblewoman, you have to break the priestess. How do you even do that?
The sources describe a process you could call religious deconversion trauma. It was very specific. They forced her to handle looted artifacts from her own temple, sacred objects that she, as a priestess, was forbidden to touch except in ritual. It was forced sacrilege.
And then they made her renounce her faith.
They made her say it out loud. They would mock her. If Artemis is so powerful, Theodora, why are you in these chains? Why didn't she save you? And they forced her to declare that her gods were powerless.
And making her say it is the key.
Verbal renunciation is an incredibly powerful psychological tool. If you say it, even if you don't believe it at first, a part of you starts to internalize it. Or at the very least, you start to feel polluted, like you've been abandoned by your faith because of what you were forced to do and say.
So what happened to Theodora?
She served for 8 years in a Roman household, and in all that time, there's a record of 0 religious observance, not once. Now, the big question is, was her faith really gone? Or did it just go deep underground, hidden away to survive? We can't know. But on the surface, the process worked. They turned the priestess into a secular servant.
And then there's the cautionary tale.
Yeah.
The one who didn't comply. Arsinoe of Pontus.
Arsinoe fought back.
She physically attacked them, right, during the cleansing.
She did. She was a famous beauty, the wife of a commander, captured in 71 BCE. When they tried to perform the resin hair removal, she attacked the bathers. She bit, she scratched, she fought with everything she had.
I mean, you want to cheer for her.
Yeah.
In a movie, this is the moment the hero starts the rebellion.
We absolutely do. We're conditioned to want that Hollywood ending where she rebels and escapes. But this is history, not Hollywood. The dealer didn't say, oh, she's feisty, I respect that.
Escalated.
Massively. He responded to her resistance with overwhelming force. Total isolation, starvation, exposure to the elements. They chained her in an open courtyard for days without shelter. They didn't try to break her will anymore. They just broke her body.
And what was the result?
She was broken, but in the wrong way for the market. She became physically deteriorated, deeply depressed, despondent. She stopped eating. She stopped speaking. From a business perspective, she was damaged goods.
So he couldn't sell her for a high price.
He sold her at a deep discount, probably at a loss. The record says she died 3 years later.
So the lesson for the other women in that facility, hearing about what happened to Arsinoe,
is that resistance only destroys you. It doesn't save you. Arsinoe becomes the proof that compliance is the only rational path to survival. The system was designed to crush anomalies like her and make an example of them.
Finally, we have Livia of Gaul. And her story is different because of a totally impersonal factor, like market forces.
Right. This was during Caesar's conquest of Gaul, around 52 BCE. And the Roman army was so successful that the market was suddenly flooded. We're talking about 1 million new captives hitting the market in a very short period.
Basic supply and demand.
Exactly. When you have 1 million slaves for sale, the price for each one plummets. The dealers, even the high-end ones, couldn't afford to spend 3 days on the intensive preparation protocol for every single captive. It just wasn't cost-effective anymore.
So what happened to Livia was just abbreviated processing?
It was the budget version. In a strange way, she got lucky because of economics. She was sold cheap, about 2,000 denarii to a merchant, not a high-status senator. It was a less formal household with fewer rules.
And she didn't undergo the full psychological dismantling.
Because the dealer didn't have the time or the money to do it properly. And the twist in her story is that she eventually earned her freedom, became a small trader herself, and used the networks she built as a slave to become successful.
So she survived. She is the exception.
She survived and she adapted. It just shows that while the system was this brutal monolith, the individual experiences within it could vary wildly based on something as cold and impersonal as the daily market price of a human being.
Okay, let's go back to Clea McGash. She's survived the 3 days. She's been scrubbed, waxed, oiled, trained, threatened, and traumatized. She has learned, through brutal conditioning, to suppress her identity. Now, it's showtime.
Part 6. The Sale.
The scene is the Agora at Corinth, a public square, now repurposed into a market.
It's crowded, it's incredibly loud, and Cleomash is brought out onto a raised platform. They put a sign around her neck. It was called the titulus.
What does that sign say? What's on her spec sheet?
It would be written in chalk on a whitened wooden board. Greek, female, 31 years old, literate, skills, household management, sold with standard warranty against hidden defects.
Can you just imagine that? Standing there, naked, in front of a crowd, with a sign around your neck that lists your skills like a resume, but you have absolutely no say in where it goes.
And then the public inspection begins. This is where all that training comes into play. Potential buyers come right up onto the platform. And they don't just look.
They touch.
They touch. They check her muscle tone. They pull her hair to check the roots for any gray. They demand she walk back and forth.
And the poet, Marshall, he describes this so vividly.
He does. He talks about the dealer making the woman stand up and sit down over and over again, turning her around, prying open her mouth to show her teeth to the crowd.
It's a public performance of total submission.
That's exactly what the dealer is selling. He's showing the crowd, look, she is obedient. She responds instantly to commands. The product is not defective.
And she does it. Cleomac does everything she's told.
She does it because she remembers the warehouse. She does it because she knows if she refuses, she just goes back to the darkroom, or worse, she does it to survive.
And then the sale happens.
The bidding starts. And because she is market ready, because the protocol works so perfectly, the price goes up and up. She is sold for 12,000 denarii.
Which is a huge amount of money.
It's about 4 times what the dealer, Flaccus, likely paid in expenses, bribes, and bounties. He's made his profit. His business model works. It's a success.
And the buyer, who bought her?
A senator named Lucius Aurelius Cotta. She is purchased to manage his large household in Rome.
So she steps off the block. The dealer hands over the little warranty scroll. And she just walks away into a life she never chose with a man she's never met.
And that really brings us to the aftermath, the long-term consequences of this process.
Because we know what happened to most of them, don't we? Cleomac never saw her children again. Bernice died wondering about hers. Arieri died broken by the system she fought.
The psychological long tail of this is immense. Modern trauma research, studies on prisoners of war or cult survivors, tells us that people who go through this kind of coercive control, this systematic stripping of agency, suffer from severe, lifelong depression, anxiety, and an inability to form trusting relationships.
It's not something you just get over. You don't just bounce back from being treated like livestock for profit.
No. You survive, but you are fundamentally changed. But of course the Romans didn't care about the long tail, they cared about the transaction. For Flaccus, this was a successful business week. For Cleomac, it was the end of her life, even though her heart kept beating for decades more.
It really reframes how you look at those artifacts you see in museums.
It absolutely does. You see a chain or a slave collar in a glass case. It's not just a piece of metal anymore. It is a tool from this specific process. It is physical evidence of the systematic destruction of a human identity.
So let's zoom out as we wrap up. What does all of this mean for us today? Because we promised a deep dive, not just a history lesson.
I think the final provocation, the thing to really chew on, is this. The techniques we just discussed. Isolation, identity attack, unpredictable stress, the manipulation of hope. They didn't disappear when the Roman Empire fell.
They're timeless tools.
They are the timeless tools of dehumanization. Wherever you see human beings trying to turn other human beings into things, whether that's in modern human trafficking, in the tactics of totalitarian regimes trying to break political dissidents, or even on a smaller scale in the dynamics of severely abusive domestic relationships, you see Flaccus's playbook.
That is a heavy thought. You're saying the dealer's protocol is still in use all around us.
It is. The technology changes, the context changes, but the psychology doesn't. When a trafficker takes a victim's passport and phone, that's isolation. When an abuser tells a partner they are worthless without them, that's identity denial. When a regime assigns a prisoner a number instead of a name, that is Corinth 146 BCE playing out right now.
So by understanding Cleomacha's story, we aren't just looking at the past. We're learning to recognize the patterns of dehumanization in our own world.
Exactly. We have to look past the beautiful statues and the marble forums. We have to learn to hear the silence of the people like Cleomach. We have to recognize that making someone a thing is a process, a deliberate, methodical process that can be identified, and hopefully that means it can also be disrupted.
These women were not commodities. They were humans who deserved to be remembered by their names. Cleomach, Bernice, Theodora, Arsinoe, Livia.
And realizing that saying their names is the first step in undoing the dealer's work.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive. It's a tough one, I know, but a really important one. We'll see you next time.